Okay, so today we're going into part 29 of the Heart of the Matter, part 29. This is also part 2 of our going through the book of Jeremiah, the book of Yirmiyahu. And as we're going through this, and as I've been putting it together, I noticed a trend in here that probably needs to be addressed before we actually get started. And that trend is that you have to understand that this is a heavy book. What I mean by heavy meaning it's not a warm, fuzzy book. There are some warm fuzzies in there, but it's really not a warm, fuzzy book. These are people that are being warned and being begged, please don't do this because you're going to go to Babylon. This is going to be a big problem. And then, of course, when they weren't listening, it gets uglier and uglier to some degree. So I want us to understand that this is still speaking to us, even though it was speaking to them. There's always that part of it, but it's going to be kind of, you may feel a little beat up as we go through a couple of these, teachings on this particular book, the book of Yirmiyahu, the book of Jeremiah, because after all, that's actually what was going on. So I just want to make sure I've said that because, you may think, wow, he's really beating this thing to death here. Well, actually, I'm going from chapter to chapter, and Yirmiyahu's saying the same thing from chapter to chapter. So don't get kind of frustrated or upset with me or bored because I'm saying the same thing over and over again. Abba decided to put it in your book over and over again. And he made Yirmiyahu, his prophet, say it over and over again. So there may be a reason we need to actually hear it over and over again. So it's going to sound in some ways, in some of these parts, a little bit redundant at times, but there's a reason. And I think the reason is because the key problem here is the heart. And Yirmiyahu is trying to address that it's a heart issue that's going on. And he's appealing to people to their hearts. And he's trying to appeal into their deepest, innermost place. And so sometimes to get there needs to be a little bit of a drilling it in and drumming it in and just kind of pressing it in that needs to be done to get us to realize that it's not just these people, in this case Yehuda, that's being told this, in the southern kingdom, but it's for us. It's kind of like when people used to say, I resent that or whatever. No, we should say, I resemble that remark. You resemble this stuff. There's something of you in here. And that's the reason we're doing these teachings. This is not just a historical teaching, just so you can understand what was going on in Judah that Jeremiah was addressing. I want you to reach deep into you to say, Abba, what is there here that's me? What's going on here that's actually me? How does this apply to me? How can I apply this in my life? And so that's really key because after going through the couple of chapters we went through last week, and now we're going to go through like 2, maybe 3 chapters this week, and we're going to read pretty much the entire chapters to make sure we're getting the context. They're heavy. There's a lot going on, and the Creator is not happy. He's disappointed. I hope you can understand. There's a reason he's disappointed, and that's what I want you to receive. As we read the chapters, you'll understand why he's not happy, why he's disappointed. Because some of you had parents that were not happy with you, and you were very frustrated because you never knew why. You just knew they weren't happy. And you really felt like, I wish I knew so I could fix it, but you never knew because they wouldn't tell you. Well, Abba's going to tell you in this book. Jeremiah is going to tell the people what the Father told him to say in order to reach them, for them to understand what it is that is making the Creator unhappy. So let's start off in chapter 5, and we're going to read this whole chapter here. We're going to begin in Yirmiyahu chapter 5, Jeremiah 5. Diligently search, verse 1, diligently search the streets of Jerusalem, and please look and know and seek in her open places. If you find a man, if there is anyone doing right ruling, seeking the truth, then I shall pardon her. Now realize what we're talking about here. And by the way, I think he's doing this right now to some degree. But when he says, if you find a man, if there's anyone doing right ruling, seeking the truth. Now, I'm sure there were people then, just like there are people now, that are on some levels seeking the truth and are on some levels doing right ruling. But have you put borders on that? Have you kind of hedged that in? In other words, I want the truth, but only up to this point. Or I want to do right ruling, but only up to this point. And see, I think this is what he's talking about here in verse 1. He's not looking just for anybody trying and making any effort. He's looking for those that are actually making the all your heart, all your strength, all your being effort. Because I'm sure even in Yehuda in this day, there were some that were doing some things right. And there were some that were actually seeking the truth in some areas. But that's what you end up finding on a regular basis, that there are people that are not seeking it in all areas. Okay? There are people that are not seeking it in all areas of life. They're only willing to deal with some of it. But see, Abba says over and over again, I want all of you. I want all of your heart, all of your being, all of your strength, all of your mind. I want it all. And so I think that's what verse 1 is talking about. He says, look, he says, diligently search the streets and see if there is anyone with all their heart, all their might, all their being, all their strength, doing right ruling and seeking all the truth. Nothing but the truth shall help me, Yahweh. Okay? He says, and then I shall pardon her. Even when they say, as Yahweh lives, they swear falsely for certain. So there were people that were saying, as Yahweh lives, but yet they weren't understanding. They didn't have that relationship with him to understand what that truly meant. They just threw that out there. And by the way, we do that in our own way when we say things like, well, he knows my heart and he understands my situation. See, we're trying to put him into our mold instead of us into his. And that's what they were doing when they would say things as Yahweh lives. That Yahweh's endorsing it in some way. That's what they were pretty much saying. Yahweh agrees with what I'm doing. Yahweh's endorsing what I'm doing. Don't we all do that to some degree? But the point is, when we do it, is it really in line with him, or are we trying to bring him in line with us? And that's where the big problem ends up being. Most of the time, it's us trying to bring him into our alignment instead of bringing us into his alignment. And when you get in alignment with him, things will work a lot easier and work a lot smoother. If you're struggling in life, it's because you have way too much that's not aligned. And so he's allowing you to struggle because something's not lined up right. Okay? If you ever try to manipulate certain types of objects that actually fit together a certain way, if they're not lined up right, they don't actually go together, do they? It's like even like a simple thing like a Ziploc bag. Right? If you don't get that thing lined up, you can zip across and then it's still not closed. Anybody ever find that? So much fun with that sometimes, right? Why won't it close? Well, because you don't have it lined up right. You think you do, but you don't. And so it doesn't work right if it's not lined up right. And then eventually you finally get it lined up right and it goes zoop, right across, no problem. But you have to take the time and the patience to actually line it up. But instead, we don't want to have to line ourselves up. We want him to line up with us. So we search the scriptures not to find out his will, but to find out if there's any way to justify our will. That's what we're doing. Verse 3, O Yahweh, are your eyes not on truth? You have smitten them, but they have not grieved. You have consumed them, but they have refused to receive instruction. They made their faces harder than rock. They refused to turn back. Now let's understand in verse 3, why are they behaving this way? Because they still think that they should be allowed and able to do what they want and he should endorse it. This isn't them fully rejecting him. Okay, Judah has not become full-blown pagans, where they're just saying, we reject Yahweh. No, they're still trying to have their cake and eat it too. That's what it's talking about here. And they're getting more and more stubborn about it. I should be able to do what I want to do, and you should be okay with it, Yahweh. That's what's going on here. And he says, look, and they made their faces harder than rock. They refused to turn back. Then I said, these are only the poor. They have been foolish, for they have not known the way of Yahweh, the right ruling of their Elohim. And by the way, when it says they have not known, again, I'm going to interpret this as relational. I'm saying this because I don't think they weren't aware. So when it says not known, it's not like they didn't have the information. So when he's saying they have not known, that known part I don't think is a matter of a lack of information. They have not known in a relational way the good. They've not tasted the good of doing it his way. They've not had a relationship with doing it his way. And so therefore they've been foolish. For they have not known or experienced and understood and tasted of the way of Yahweh, the right ruling of their Elohim. Otherwise, if you have, why wouldn't you do it that way? I mean, if you really have tasted of it, there's no choice. The choice is so obvious. It works. It's the only thing that works. It works the best. It works without any negatives. I mean, there's a lot of things in life that you do, and it seems like it worked, it kind of accomplished what you wanted to accomplish, but then there's all this kind of ramifications that you have to deal with because you didn't do it really the right way. You got the job done, but you didn't do it the right way. And so guess what? There's sort of a penalty and payment for when you do things. You took a shortcut or you did something, whatever, and so sure, you got it done, but at a cost, at a price. But if you have tasted of doing it Yahweh's way, there's never anything negative. It's only good. It's only pure because it's the right way. You know, a lot of us had that experience as youth, in our youth, where we'd go out and we'd party, we'd have fun. We called it fun. But how much of that fun, when you got up the next morning, did you pay a penalty for? But you go and have Yahweh-level fun with brethren and hanging out and celebrating your Creator, you wake up and you're refreshed and you're good and there's nothing negative. There's nothing to feel guilty about. There's no recriminations. You know what I'm saying? That's what this is all about, though, in every area of our life. Are we trying to do it His way, or are we trying to find what looks like the easier path? Key word, looks like the easier path. And so we look for the shortcut, because after all, that other path seems way too hard. Listen, let me ask you something, and you're going to all tell the truth here. I know you are. How many times, I'm going to just see if this is true, how many times have you tried to do the shortcut and it took you 3 times longer to do? Almost every time, right? Because you thought you were going to be slick and you found a way that's going to save you a whole lot of time, and you're going to cut a corner here or a corner there. Next thing you know, you have to go back eventually, do it the right way anyway, because the shortcut didn't work. It only made a disaster. And that's all Abba's trying to say is, look, just do it my way the first time, and it's just going to be so easy and so good. And all the blessing is there, and nothing to guilt about, no guilt, no recriminations, no sorrow, no pain, no suffering. It all works great. Verse 5, he says, let me go to the great men and speak to them, for they have known the way of Yahweh, the right ruling of their Elohim, but these have altogether broken the yoke and torn off the bonds. So now he's saying, let me go to the great men and speak to them, the ones who have known. So there were some that have known. There were some that had that relationship with. He said, but these one that Yahweh is all upset about, they have altogether broken the yoke and turned off the bonds. They've broken the yoke and turned off the bonds. Now, this is an important term to understand, because doesn't Yeshua say something about take upon you my yoke? Take upon you my yoke. Now, and I'm not speaking to Yirmiyahu's days. I'm actually going to speak to Yeshua's days a little bit, because I have research that I've done about discipleship in Yeshua's day. Not just he was not the only one discipling. We have to understand that. You know, so people didn't look at it weird as he walked around the streets and had a dozen or so students following him around. There was a bunch of guys like this all over the place who had students following them around. They didn't have colleges and universities to go to like we do today. They had a teacher that would take in students, and the student would ask if they could be a student, and the teacher had to accept them, which is what made Yeshua a little unique. He didn't wait for anybody to come to him. He went to them and said, come, follow me. He actually hand-selected them from scratch. Now, one of the things that was one of the idioms or the terms is that when you were studying in discipleship under a teacher, is that you were actually learning and studying to be like them, to understand what they knew, to do the way they did them, etc., because you realized they had something you wanted. They understood things that you didn't understand, and that was called taking their yoke upon you. So this is an idiomatic phrase. So each teacher had a yoke. And so they all had a yoke that you could take upon you. And so here Abba's using the same phrase. That's why the idiomatic phrase was being used by the Jewish community, even in Yeshua's days. This idea of saying, look, he says, these have altogether broken the yoke. In other words, I was their teacher. I taught them. I instructed them. And they took upon them a yoke, and they've broken it. They've broken it. They've torn off the bonds. There's a relationship that happens with disciple and teacher or discipler, where you are in relationship where you say, whatever you say, I'm going to do. Mold me. In other words, you're coming as soft clay before that teacher and saying, I'm here to mold. I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to ask questions. Well, you may ask questions for understanding, but I'm not here to question you. Well, why are we doing that? Instead of saying things like, wow, why do we do that? You see, there's a difference between saying, why do we do that? And saying, well, why are we doing that? It sounds just like a tone of voice thing, but the second one is like, well, that looks stupid. Why are we doing that? I mean, that seems dumb. What's the point in that? As opposed to going, wow, I don't understand this. Well, why is it that we do this? So there was a contract between the disciple and the teacher. And that contract was, the teacher said, basically, so what the contract is, the same as the covenant. The teacher said, I'm going to speak, you're going to listen. That's really the contract. It's the same covenant that Abba has with us. It's a discipling covenant. Yahweh says, I will tell you, what in Exodus 19, right? He says, I will speak and you will obey. If you will diligently obey and agree to do everything that I say, I will take you as my disciples. That's essentially what Exodus 19 is saying. I will accept you as my disciples. Because the discipleship program was that you would be literally clay in the molding hands of that person that you were submitting yourself to. Because you remember, in those days, they picked their teachers and the teacher had to then accept them. But you picked your teacher. And so you knew the type of person that you were going to. You said, I selected you because I want to be like you. And so I'm going to be willing to come and I'm going to live with you. I'm going to eat with you. We're going to stay in the same, I mean, literally like moving in. Like having a guest in your house. I'm going to move in, but I'm going to be there to be whatever you decide I need to be. So that I could be on the path to becoming like you because there's something in you that I know I want and I need. And that was basically what Yeshua said. He said, look, the Father himself is not here, but I'm here. So imitate me as I imitate the Father. That's really the whole discipleship process. We talked about this a couple of times already. And then the apostles were then told to go out and disciple. So what were they supposed to do? To tell the people, imitate us as we imitate Yeshua, who imitates the Father. And it goes down the chain. But discipling is not instructing. It's not teaching. You know, it's like a lot of times Matthew 28 is read out, go out and teach all nations. No, disciple them. Which means they had to look for those that were willing to be discipled. You had to volunteer to be that submissive. And the people, starting in Exodus 19, said, yes, we would be that submissive. But did they? No. When it really comes down to it, no. We get excited and we get emotional. I'm talking about all of us now today. And we say, oh, yes, I'll do whatever, I'll do anything. But just show me the truth and I'm going to do it. And we get excited. And then when we start actually having to do it, it's not always there. The excitement sort of diminishes. Because after all, at some point, what he says is going to get inconvenient in this world we live in. Or inconvenient for my own preferences. And so when that happens, we have a problem. No longer are we the easy, soft, moldable clay. Remember what we read about in this previous verse. It says, they made their faces harder than rock. See, this idea, again, fits into the clay analogy. They became less pliable in the master's hands because of a hardness that came in there, because there was some conflict, but I don't really want to do it that way. But I don't really want to do what you want me to do. I think I'm smart enough to know what I need to do. And so they spun it and they twisted it. So let's be careful that, again, I'm trying to make sure that, are you seeing yourself in any of this stuff? Can you see that process? And then we have this word yoke. So it says, Yahweh says, look, these have altogether broken the yoke. In other words, they broke the discipleship contract. That's what he's saying there. Breaking of a yoke is breaking a discipleship contract. And that's where you even get that verse that says, these are trying to put on you a yoke that even our forefathers could not bear. So now there are other yokes out there. There are other leaders and other people that want you to come and put on their yoke. In other words, be like me, do what I do, say what I say. That's not the right one. And guess what? That leads to all kinds of suffering. And by the way, all of us have had yokes that we've thrown off, and we realized that they cause nothing but suffering. But now, are you willing to truly put on his yoke? Because he says his yoke is light. Put on my yoke, it's light. And actually, I'm going to take that a little further. Yeshua is the light. So we're not going to say light as in light versus heavy. My yoke is light. I don't think I've ever said that before. But that's powerful right there. My yoke is light. What is the light? The truth, the Torah. My yoke is light. I love it, love it. I wish I'd have thought of that years ago. That's great. But think about that. Because normally we're thinking light versus heavy. Why not just think of it the other way? My yoke is or, it's light. Beautiful. Therefore, a lion from the forest shall smite them, a wolf of the deserts ravage them. A leopard is watching over their cities. Whoever comes out of them is torn in pieces. For their transgressions have been many, their backslidings have been numerous. So what is he saying? He's saying, look, if you're going to transgress and backslide, you're going to have all kinds of predators coming after you. And predators don't have to be like lions and wolves and leopards. It could be people who are going to attack your life. And they're going to prey on you, P-R-E-Y, okay? You're going to be prey to them. So you're opening yourself up to this predator lifestyle where you're going to be the prey. He says, why should I pardon you for this? Your children have forsaken me and sworn by those that are not mighty ones. When I had filled them up, they then committed adultery, and they thronged to the house of a whore. They were like well-fed horses, everyone neighed after his neighbor's wife. Would I not punish them for this, declares Yahweh? And would I not revenge myself on such a nation as this? Now, let me stop there for a second. Now, I know it mentions adultery, but it really is talking about the most, probably root cause of the 10 Commandments, root sin, the 10th commandment, coveting. All of the breaking of the other commandments all fall into you do it because of coveting something. It really is at the root of all of it. And so what do you see here? It says, look, he says they're well-fed, like well-fed horses. Everyone, okay, I've got a bunch of stuff, but I still want something more. I'm not satisfied. I'm still coveting. There's that insatiable part of us that we never have enough. It's never good enough. I always want more. Grass is always greener. I want what they have. What I have is never good enough. We are not a people that understands how to be appreciatively satisfied. Okay, we have lost any touch with being appreciatively satisfied. Can we appreciate what we have and be satisfied? There's a reason, and I think sometimes we don't focus on it enough during the Passover Seder, but they sing the song Dayenu. And Dayenu means it would have been enough. It would have been sufficient. And so that song talks about the journey where it says, had Yahweh just brought us out of Egypt and not done anything else for us, it would have been Dayenu, it would have been sufficient. Had he brought us out of Egypt and let us pass through the Red Sea, it would have been sufficient. Had he brought us out of Egypt and past the sea and brought us to Sinai, see, all these places, they say, we could have been satisfied. But you know what? They were never satisfied. Only for a moment. But then that hunger and lusting after, the desires of the flesh kick in. And so he says, look, they're like well-fed horses. They're well-fed. So what should they need? But yet they still are neighing after their neighbor's wife. And it's not necessarily just about men and women and literally going after wives. It's like they've got something you want. And you sit there going, okay, I keep Shabbat, I keep the feast, I eat kosher, I'm trying to keep the Torah, and I'm financially at this level, but then I look at my friend who eats pork and he works on Saturday and he blah, 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 and he's where I'm at plus 10 or where I'm at doubled. And we can mistakenly go, oh, but look. And by the way, you have prophets that say things like that on a regular basis. Abba, why does it look like the sinners prosper? And Abba says, because it's just appearances. Don't go by appearances. They're not really prospering. Listen, if this is all you want, is this life? Go. Do whatever you can. Enjoy every bit of this life. But realize that's all you're going to have. See, all of us, hopefully, well, I used the word hope in there already, but hopefully we have a hope of something beyond this life. There's a hope that there's more. And that's what we're working towards, and that's what we're striving towards, and that's what we're believing in and trusting in, and that's why we do what we do, because it's the something more that's coming, not this. But yet still, we get wrapped up in this because we live in this flesh suit, and we live in this world, this fleshly world, and so it's easy to get drawn into and tempted into the lusts of the eyes and desires, the pride of life, all that kind of stuff, which is, again, mostly the 10th commandment, coveting. I want what they have. Well, how come they have? And then we do the analysis and go, oh, well, because they do this, this, and this that I don't. And then you wrongly connect up, if I do this, this, and this, then I'll have what they have. That'll satisfy me. Instead of being satisfied with what you have. Because it really has to do with Scripture says, He's not going to give you more until you do what you're supposed to do with what you have. And to be satisfied with what you have. And until what you have is enough, why would He give you more? I mean, you don't even appreciate what you have. I know I'm beating that to death, but that's the heart of our problem. That is so at the core of our problem. And so then what happens? We become prey for the leopards and the lions and the wolves. And we wonder, why is this happening? Because you have a heart problem. Somewhere in there's a heart problem, and the heart problem is causing you to have an action problem. Because remember, we talked about it last week. The thought goes into the heart, gets emotion attached to it, it then manifests as an action, actions manifest into habits, habits manifest into destinies. So whatever you're reaping is because you sowed, and whatever you sowed is basically a manifestation of what was in your heart. Because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, actions come forth. All these things start in the heart. They all start in the heart. So they were having a heart problem. Let's see. So now we're on let's go to verse 9. Would I not punish them for this, declares Yahweh, and would I not revenge myself on such a nation as this? Go up on her walls and destroy, but do not make a complete end. Take away her branches, for they do not belong to Yahweh. For the house of Yisrael and the house of Yehudah have utterly betrayed me, declares Yahweh. Now, isn't that what's happening today? We can see that the wrath that comes in the day of that great and awesome day of Yahweh that's coming is why? Well, because of all of this. Because they have not done. He says, so would I not revenge myself on them? And we're going to see that the Gentiles get wrapped into this as well. There's a verse that we're going to get to read either today or next part where it's going to talk about the idea that He's going to take out His wrath on the circumcised and the uncircumcised. Everybody's going to get to feel this. Let's continue. He says, they have been untrue to Yahweh, verse 12. It is not He, no evil comes upon us, nor do we see sword or scarcity of food. And the prophets have become wind, and the word is not in them, thus shall be done to them. Now look, he says, they have been untrue to Yahweh and have said. They go, it is not He. In other words, Yahweh's not doing this. It's not He. He's not really in charge. No evil comes upon us, nor do we see a sword or scarcity. In other words, we don't believe all this. And the prophets have become wind. Because see, the prophets are the one telling them, it's coming. This is really coming. Now, I'm not claiming to be a prophet, but I'm acting in the role of a prophet when I teach you the teachings where I'm saying, this is real, it's coming. You have to wake up, you have to do it. That's a function of a prophet, to cry aloud, spare not, and warn you. Now, I'm not the actual prophet. I'm reading the prophet, but I'm doing it in such a way that hopefully is going to reach into you so that you're hearing them more than you're hearing me. He says, but they became wind, and the word is not in them. Thus shall be done to them. Thus said Yahweh, Elohim of hosts, because you speak this word. See, I am making my words in your mouth fire, and this people wood, and it shall devour them. See, I am bringing a nation against you from afar, a house of Yisrael, declares Yahweh. O house of Israel, declares Yahweh. It is an enduring nation. It is an ancient nation, a nation whose language you do not know, nor do you understand what they say. Their quiver is like an open tomb. All of them are mighty men. And they shall eat up your harvest and your bread, which your sons and daughters shall eat. They shall eat up your flocks and your herds, and they shall eat up your vines and your fig trees. With the sword they shall demolish your walled cities, in which you are trusting. But even in those days, declares Yahweh, I shall not make a complete end of you. So what he's saying is, look, you've earned this. You're going to reap what you sowed. But even in that, I'm not going to make a complete end of you. Why? Why isn't he going to make a complete end of them? because he promised he wouldn't. So there needed to be a remnant to go forward so that he can fulfill the things that he promised to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. He made a promise. Now, we break promises all the time. He'll never break a promise. Otherwise, we have nothing else to hold on to. I mean, if it's possible that he would break his word and break his promise, then what are we depending on? We've got nothing. We're wasting our time. But we know he will keep his word. And he reminds everybody that in here, when it sounds like he's about to wipe everybody out, he says, but remember, he says, I'm not going to make a complete end of you. And it shall be when they say, why does Yahweh our Elohim do all of this to us? Then you shall say to them, you shall answer them, saying, as you have forsaken me and served foreign mighty ones in your land, so you shall serve foreigners in a land that is not yours. Declare this in the house of Yaakov and proclaim it in Yehudah, saying, hear this now, O foolish people without heart, who have eyes and see not, and ears and hear not. See, all of this we read to get to that verse with the word heart in it. We finally got over there, all the way to this verse with heart in it. He says, look, hear this, O foolish people without heart, who have eyes and see not, and ears and hear not. Now, in this case, we're not going to go to, as we did in the teaching on the Father and the Son, and say, well, he has not given them eyes to see and ears to hear. He says, oh, no. They had eyes to see and ears to hear. Their heart was so wrong, it closed their eyes and closed their ears. Do you understand the difference? Okay, this is not like the people that you get frustrated with who he's never given them the eyes to see or the ears to hear, so you're speaking Martian to them. No, these are people who had eyes to see, had ears to hear, but their heart, listen now, he says, their heart was not there. He says, this is a foolish people without a heart for him, without heart. The Torah is Yahweh's heart. They're without Torah. They're without Yahweh's heart. He says, so they've chosen to turn their eyes and their ears to be blind and deaf. He says, do you not fear me, declares Yahweh? Do you not tremble at my presence, who have placed the sand as the boundary of the sea by an everlasting law, and it does not pass over it? Though its waves toss to and fro, they are not able. Though they roar, they do not pass over it. But this people has a backsliding and rebellious heart. They have turned aside and gone away. So now he's going to explain what's caused the deafness and the blindness. Their heart was a heart towards backsliding and rebellion. Okay, and I want to redefine that just a little bit in that the backsliding is obvious. Hey, my desires and my preferences don't match up with his, so I'm going to start leaning in that direction. That's how we backslide. We slide back. Well, let's reverse the words. Instead of backsliding, we're sliding back into our old place, our old habits, our old way of doing things, our old desires and lusts, etc. We're sliding back. But when he says, as he's going into backsliding, he also says rebellious. So the sliding back and rebellious are connected in that we're sliding back into what? Self-sovereignty. It's self-sovereignty that we're sliding back into. So this is the rebelliousness. It's not rebellious going, I'm rejecting you. It's a rebelliousness from the other point of view, I'm choosing me, which is still rebellion. Hopefully that makes sense. Because normally we think of rebellion like we think of like the American Revolution or the French Revolution or this revolution, that, where they were rejecting a particular authority and they were coming out against that authority. I don't see that here with the people. The people are doing it in a much more subtle way. It's the backsliding way into rebellion where I'm choosing to elevate myself over you. I'm sliding back into self-sovereignty. That's rebellion. Because in order to do so, you need to sit back on that self-sovereign throne that's in your own life, and it means he can't sit there anymore. So you're rebelling against the proper person sitting in the seat. So let's not slide back into that old self-sovereignty. He said, but this foolish people, last week he called them foolish and stupid in chapter 4. And in verse 22, he says, my people are foolish and they have not known me. They are stupid children and they have no understanding. See, now he's repeating himself in chapter 5, but he wants to make sure we understand. He says, do you not fear me? Do you not fear me? He says, well, you're backsliding. That's your problem. Verse 23, but this people had a backsliding and rebellious heart. They've turned aside and gone away. They do not say in their heart, let us now fear Yahweh our Elohim, who gives rain, both the former and the latter in its season. He guards for us the appointed weeks of the harvest. In other words, they're not saying, let us fear Yahweh, who actually is doing everything that's out there, who set the stars in the heavens, who set the earth in its rotation, who, you know what I'm saying? Let's not fear the one that actually did all that. Let's be afraid of foolish things. It's the same thing Yeshua was talking about in Matthew 6 when he says, why do you worry about what you wear and what you eat and having food and clothing and all this other stuff? He says, seek first the kingdom and everything else will be given to you. It'll all be provided. But you want to fear other stuff. Oh, you're going to fear your boss, you're going to fear your cousin, you're going to fear your mother, you're going to fear your best friend, you're going to fear everybody. Goes back to the fear of Yahweh teaching. Go back and re-listen to that if you haven't heard it, or you need to hear it again. Stop being afraid of everybody else. Only fear him. Because if you fear him, you'll never be afraid again. He said, but this foolish people, he said, they're not saying things. They're not saying in their heart. They're not saying, let us now fear Yahweh. Verse 25, it says, your crookedness have turned these away, and your sins have kept the good from you. So guess what? Your sins keep good from you. So if you're missing some area in your life that's missing good, and you're struggling to find good in those areas, there may be some sin going on that you've not addressed yet. He says, look, your sin has kept the good from you. Wow. He says, verse 26, from among my people are found wrong men who lie in wait as one who sets snares. They have set up a trap, they catch men. As a cage is filled with birds, so their houses are filled with deceit. Therefore they have become great and grown rich. They have become fat, they are sleek. They also overlook the deeds of the wrong. They did not rightly rule the cause of the fatherless, so that they prosper, and the right of the needy they did not rightly rule. Would I not punish them for this, declares Yahweh? Would I not revenge myself on such a nation as this? By the way, all of this stuff was told to them in Exodus, in Leviticus, over and over again in Deuteronomy. Do these things. Rightly rule for the needy, for the poor, for the fatherless, etc. And they weren't doing it. They became callous and hard and cold in their hearts and could not care for the needs of others. And Yahweh says, would I not punish them for this? By the way, he says in Deuteronomy 28, if you do not diligently obey, I'm going to punish you with all these punishments. So Yahweh's saying, well, should I not? The contract offered this. It was in the contract. You knew this was coming. He said, an astounding and horrible matter has come to the land. The prophets have prophesied falsely, and the priests rule by their own hand, and my people have loved it so. And what are you going to do at the end of it? In other words, what are you going to do now? If that's what you got, what do you have? The prophets have prophesied falsely. Okay, so let's remember what prophecy is. Prophecy is speaking the word of Yahweh with authority. It's inspired speech. Okay, it's not necessarily just speaking the future or other things that we may think it is. It's speaking the word of Yahweh with authority. And so it says here, the people claiming to be prophets have not properly spoken the word of Yahweh with authority. They falsely said that Yahweh said something when Yahweh hadn't said it. And the priests rule by their own hand. In other words, these are not his priests. And these are guys who are just doing what they want to do. He says, and the people, he goes, my people have loved it so. Because of a problem called pandering. The priests, the leadership were all pandering to the people. They wanted the people to love them. I'll tell you one thing, and maybe this will be taken the right way. I don't want you to love me. I want you to love him. See, the priests missed that point. They wanted people to love them. Now, I would like you to love me, don't get me wrong, but I want you to love him. My whole point is to have you love him. And these priests, he says, and my people loved it so. Why? Because the priests were pandering to them, and so the people loved it. We love you, priests. What a wonderful priest. You say all the things we want to hear. That's how you fill a stadium, and you call yourself, a minister of Yahweh, and you have this big giant stadium full of people in Texas. Mr. Olstein. Because all he does is tickle everybody's ears. Boy, if you want to feel good, listen to his show. You'll feel good. He will only tell you stuff that you can do it. He loves you. He's just going to, you know what? You can get any motivational speaker to do the same stuff. You can do it. If you want a rah-rah cheerleader, he's your guy. Is that going to help you at all in your life? Not the slightest bit. But you'll be going down the hill at the same speed you were before, but you can have a smile on your face thinking that it's all good. because he's pumped you up. He's pumped you up. And that's what was happening here. He says, look, the prophets have prophesied falsely. He said, but my people love it so. They love it so. You know, Ezekiel 22, in verse 25, it says, it's a conspiracy of her prophets in her midst. This is in Ezekiel 22:25. Like a roaring lion tearing the prey, they've devoured life. They've taken wealth, precious matters. They've made many widows in their midst. And her priests have done violence to my teaching. Okay, so who's priests? Well, these are people that still claim to be priests of Yah. But what have they done? They've done violence to my teaching. Wow, he didn't just say they taught it falsely. They've done violence to it. You know, today, is there anything more violent than the church telling you it's all done away with? That's about as violent as you can get. They've done away with it. What could be more violent to his teaching than just doing away with it? He says that they profane my set-apart matters. You know, when you claim Sunday's the Sabbath, that's profaning something that he's set apart. When you claim Christmas and Easter are holy days, that's profaning something that he's set apart. Because you're claiming it's his when it's not. They have not distinguished between the kadosh and the profane, the set apart and the profane, nor have they known the difference between the unclean and the clean, the tameh and the tahor. And they have hidden their eyes from my Sabbaths, plural, because you have the annual Sabbaths as well as the weekly Sabbath. And I am profaned in their midst. Her leaders in her midst are like wolves tearing the prey to shed blood, to destroy lives, to get greedy gain. And her prophets have coated them with whitewash. This is it. They're tickling all those ears, making them all feel good, saying, you know, seeing a false vision, divining a lie for them, saying, thus said the Master Yahweh, when Yahweh hadn't spoken. And the key is that thus said the Master Yahweh is saying what the people wanted to hear. By the way, we see that in Yirmiyahu. There's a so-called prophet stands up and tells the king, oh, don't listen to Jeremiah. Everything's going to be fine. And Jeremiah says, a year from now, you're going to be dead for doing that. Because you dared to break. That's what Ezekiel's talking about, the same thing. So clearly what was going on in Jeremiah's time is no different in Ezekiel's time. They're still doing the same thing. He's saying, look, they're saying, thus said Yahweh, when Yahweh hadn't said. How many people tomorrow, on Sunday, on your cable television, in their churches, are going to say, oh, the Lord told me to tell you. Are you going to hear that tomorrow? Somebody going to hear that? Okay? That he woke me up this morning and gave me a message for you. You better be real scared using those words. At least according, maybe they never read Ezekiel 22. But I've read Ezekiel 22, and you don't hear me coming up to you saying, oh, I've got a direct message for you that I need to share with you. Now, I may feel led to bring you into a teaching in the book because I feel impressed by him to read you his words and not just claim he said something to me, because that's what these people are doing. They're claiming that they got some direct revelation that's outside of the book to share with you. And so these so-called prophets have coated them, you know, they've coated them with whitewash. In other words, they just said whatever they want to do, make it all look shiny and white and clean when it was just covering up all kinds of profanity. It's like taking a wall full of graffiti and they're just painting it over with whitewash. But really, they're just painting it over. They're not fixing it. They didn't clean it up. They didn't wash it off. You know, and then you go forth, and guess what? It almost sounds just like Jeremiah in verse 30. He says, and I sought for a man among them who would make a wall and stand in the breach before me on behalf of the land that I should not destroy it, but I didn't find one. Isn't that the same thing we were just reading from Jeremiah? At the very beginning of that chapter, Jeremiah, we were reading that, and he says, look, hold on, I turned the page to the wrong chapter here, chapter 5. He says, look, diligently search the streets and see if you can find one. It's the same thing, isn't it? Diligently search the streets. Well, Ezekiel's having the same problem. Yahweh's talking to Ezekiel, and Yahweh's having the same problem in Ezekiel's moments as he was in Jeremiah's moments. Nothing's changed. I want to go back a little bit here in the chapter to chapter 5 and verse 10, back in Yirmiyahu. And it said, go up on her walls and destroy, but do not make a complete end. Take away her branches. Take away her branches. What does that mean? Take away her branches. Anybody think of a verse that talks about in the Brit about taking away branches? I heard somebody yell it out. John 15. Well done, Marty. So let's look at John 15 and verse 1. John 15 and verse 1, because I had this in my notes. I passed through it real quick because I wanted to make sure we got the full point of reading chapter 5 of Jeremiah, but now I want to go back and I want to hit this point. He said that I will take away their branches. Well, let's understand why. Because Yeshua addresses this very clearly in John 15. He says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Every branch in me, okay, let's just stop right there. I am the true vine, and he's talking now a branch in me. So he's talking about an offshoot from him. In other words, you're a part of him, you're attached and connected. It's a discipleship again. You are a branch in him. You've attached yourself to him. You're growing and being fed and nurtured. You're from him. He says, every branch in me that bears no fruit. By the way, this is for all the Baptists and everybody else out there who believed in the whole once saved, always saved thing. Look, every branch in me, can we all agree that at least by mainstream Christianity's terms, that's a saved person? Can we all agree on that? At least the way mainstream Christianity would say, a branch in him would have to be a saved person. Okay, so if their theory is correct, he says, look, every branch in me that bears no fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes so that it bears more fruit. Let's look at verse 6. He says, if anyone does not stay in me, he is thrown away. What do you mean if he doesn't stay in me? I didn't think you could leave. You're once saved, always saved. How could you not stay in me? He says, if anyone doesn't stay in me, they had to already be in him to not stay. You can't have someone say that they're not staying unless they were there to begin with. So they were staying in him. He says, if they don't stay, if they were there and they leave, he's thrown away as a branch and dries up, and they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. Isn't that what's talking about in Jeremiah 5? It's the same thing. So we'll go back to verse 3. It says, you are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. He says, look, every branch that bears fruit, he says, those branches that are bearing fruit are already clean. And as you're clean while you're bearing fruit. But guess what? You stop being clean, you're not going to bear fruit. So it's not, again, a permanent status here. It says, you are already clean. Yes. But guess what? If I have my son or my daughter take a shower and they're clean, do they ever need another shower? In other words, you can become dirty again, can't you? He says, so they're already clean, and so they're bearing fruit. He says, stay in me. That's the key to staying clean. Stay in me, and I stay in you. As the branch is unable to bear fruit of itself unless it stays in the vine. You have to be fed through the vine. You have to stay in the Torah, in the truth, in the light, in the Son, in Yeshua. You see? You have to stay in all of that. He says, stay in me. He says, because otherwise you're unable to bear fruit unless you stay in the vine. So neither you unless you stay in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. Verse 6 from chapter 14. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. You need to stay in the way. You have to stay in the truth. You have to stay in the life. So it's all connecting together. This is only a few minutes later, really, as you're going through this whole thing. He's just speaking this whole long speech here, this long sermon. Okay, from John 14 straight through, and he goes, because there's nowhere it says here that then he stopped and he went to another town or something. He's still going. So he had just said in verse 6 of 14, he says, I am the way. Stay in me. Stay in the way. There is a way. There's also a way that seems right to a man, and that way leads to what? Death, destruction. But he says, I am the way that leads to life. He says, so stay in me. Stay in life. He says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Who stays in me and I in him, he bears much fruit, because without me you are able to do nothing. Without me, without what is me? Without life, without the way, without the path, without the truth, how can you do anything? You can't do anything. It's not saying without some ooey-gooey spirit thing is just going to do it all for you thing. He says, look, if you don't have me, the fullness of what I am the son of the creator of the universe. I am the creator of this, or I was part of the creation of this earth. I am the master of masters, the king of kings, but I'm also, in a much more important way, I am light. I am truth. I am life itself. I am the Torah. You understand what I'm saying here? You have to embrace all that he is. Now, were they doing that in Jeremiah's day? Nope. And they had access to all this, but they weren't doing it. And that's what Yahweh's yelling at them about here. He's really coming down hard on them. He says, look, then we get to verse 6. If anyone doesn't stay in me, he's thrown in the fire, right? We talk about he's thrown away as branches that dry up, and they gather and throw them in the fire, and they're burned. Verse 7, if you stay in me, and my words stay in you, you shall ask whatever you wish, and it shall be done for you. if you stay in me, and not just if you stay in me or think you stay in me or claim I'm Messiah. No, if you stay in me, stay in the way, stay in the life, stay in the truth, and my words stay in you. By the way, how do you know if these things are happening? He already told you. It will bear fruit. That's how you know it's happening, because there'll be fruit as evidence. So if you stay in me and you're bearing fruit, guess what? Then you can ask whatever you wish and it shall be done for you. But only then. So a lot of people are like, I ask and I ask. Well, okay, but are you staying in him? And are your words his words staying in you? Because only at that point can you ask. By the way, that's consistent with John 14, where he says, let's see, truly, truly, I say to you in verse 12, he who believes in me, the works that I shall do, he shall do also, and greater works than these, because I go to the Father. And whatever you ask in my name, I shall do, in order that the Father might be esteemed in the Son. If you ask whatever in my name, I shall do it. Now, there is a study on that Hebrew word for name, Shem, which actually, when you get into it, you'll understand it's referring to character. Now, we talked about in the no other name teaching that it refers to not only character, but reputation and identity. But let's use the word character. He says, look, whatever you ask in my character. In other words, when you're behaving like me and acting like me and thinking like me, then I will do it. So if you're not behaving like me and acting like me, then don't be surprised that the answer is no. Whatever you ask in my character, that you're doing in my character, in my reputation, the way I do things, he said, I will do it for you. That I shall do. Why? In order that the Father might be esteemed in the Son. And he says, all of this is, and if you love me, you shall guard my commands. And then I shall ask for the helper to be sent, etc. So all of this is connected in the same consistent way. If we're going about it in the wrong way, it's not going to work. There's a right way to do things. But are we willing to do it the right way? That's really the question. Are we willing to submit to what he has said is the right way? And so he says here again in verse 7, if you stay in me and my words stay in you, you shall ask whatever you wish and it shall be done for you. In this my Father is esteemed, or gains a lot of honor, that you bear much fruit, and you shall be my disciples. So now we're back to that discipling thing. In other words, you shall be those that have come to fully yield and submit to become like me, to let me mold you the way you need to be molded. Are you going to be pliable in the Master's hands? He says, if this is going on, then truly you shall be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Stay in my love. So now he's telling you that this whole love thing is connected to Torah. By the way, we have a teaching. I'm going to redo it at some point, but we do have the teachings right now called Love and Torah. You will be amazed if you listen to that teaching that almost everywhere love is mentioned, Torah observance is mentioned. If you love me, keep my commandments. And you shall love me with all your heart, with all your strength, all might, and guard my commands. Over and over again in the Old Testament, over and over again in the New Testament. Love and Torah always go together. And so we've been talking about his word here. He just said in verse 7, if you stay in me and my word stays in you, that's the Torah. And then he says, and if you guard my commands, verse 10, and you shall stay in my love. He says, as the Father's loved me, I have also loved you. Stay in my love. If you guard my commands, you shall stay in my love. He tells you right there, that's how it's done. If you guard the commands, you stay in his love. Even as I have guarded my Father's commands and stay in his love. That's discipleship. You know that Yeshua is in the Father's love, and you want to be there too. So you go to Yeshua and say, Yeshua, I want to be like you because I know you are doing what the Father wants, and so let me come to you and learn how to do that. That's why we go to Yeshua. We go to Yeshua seeking to understand, how do we do that? And then if you become a quote-unquote, like a graduated disciple, we'll call that an apostle, you get sent out to do the same thing that he did. Go and find disciples and disciple them. But you know what? It's one thing to go out there and say, I'm going out to disciple the nations. It's another thing to find people that are willing to be discipled. Because discipling was not just like, okay, let me have a couple of teachings to listen to, and I'll let you know whether or not I agree with you. Oh, I'm going to check your stuff out. Well, good, do all of that. That's before you become a disciple. But after you've done that, you'll decide if you want to still be that person's disciple. Because people will still say, oh, I'm discipled directly by the Ruach. Where do you see that verse anywhere? Did you see Yeshua at the end of Matthew saying, go out and tell everybody they need to be discipled by the Ruach? Do you see that? Is that verse anywhere in anybody's Bible? No. He told them to go disciple people. And actually nations. So this is a people working with people, directing them to Messiah, directing them to the Father. Because how is the Father supposed to know that we're going and growing in the way that going along the path and growing along the path that we need to, unless he sees us working with each other and demonstrating that we got it, that we understood it. One of the best ways to see if a student understands something is ask them to teach it back to you. If you're teaching them a math concept, an English concept, a history concept, say, okay, you teach me back. Explain it to me. Then I know if you understood what I taught you. If you can teach me. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is, I know we're reading John 15 here, but this John 15 is all about Jeremiah 5. They were not doing this. They were mocking and laughing at the prophets. They didn't want to listen to anybody. They became hard and unpliable. They were not being discipled anymore because they refused to be disciples. And by the way, that's what Yahweh was doing all the way along. Moses was discipling, and then we had the 70, and they were discipling, and it was supposed to be a transference of understanding of the word of Yahweh that people would then start to embrace and start to walk in it and then teach others. This is how we transform the whole planet. But it all starts with you. It goes back to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you put it on your son or your daughter or whatever. You need to get you right first. Or you're of no use to getting anybody else right. Because all you're going to do is teach them to be like you, and if you're not right, what are you going to have? Disciples who are like you. That's pretty frightening. Could you imagine a whole city or town of you? Now, some of us still have so much pride and ego, we think, oh, that'd be great. Ask the people that know you real well how great that might be. They love you. They may not want 50 of you. Okay? Or 1,000 or 100 or whatever it is. Okay? My mother loved me. I know she loved me, but I once asked my mother when I was a teenager, I said, what would you have done if, because I was first. Because I was wondering if my brothers would have been, I said, what would you have done if you'd had twins of me? She said, I wouldn't have had anybody else. I would have had my hands full right there. I mean, 2 of you? I said, I don't want to think of 2 of you. But she could have said that about anybody. It could have been my brother asking the same question. You understand what I'm saying? As wonderful as your children are, you don't need 4, 5, and 6 of this. Could you imagine of the same thing? That's why we have all these different personalities in our children. It's wonderful because it kind of changes things up. Could you imagine if all the children were going through the same drama and the same thing all at the same time? Well, that's what happens to the nation of Israel. They're all going through that same thing all at the same time. And now they're becoming rebellious because they're all strengthening each other in their error, in their wrong mindset. In the wrong mindset. So no, at the moment, we don't want whole cities of you. Eventually, we do, though. If you would do John 15, if you would stay in him, if you would bear the fruit, if you would be moldable in the hands of the master potter and you would allow him to mold you, then we want a whole universe full of people just like you because you would be just like him. Because, see, the only one we know for sure that Abba wants to live with forever is his son. So clearly, the best way to know that he wants to live with you forever is to become like his son. Sure, you're still going to have your own individual personality, but you become like him in your heart, in your mindset, in your approach. Yeshua felt the disciples were that way. His disciples, the Talmudim, the ones who were called then the apostles. But they look, Peter was very different than John. I mean, there's no 2 ways about it. Their personalities were like opposites, okay? Clearly Peter was more the, volatile, headstrong, and John was more gentle. I mean, you have the 2 different personalities. Although as gentle as John was, he's in his writings, he's saying, if you say you know him and don't keep his commandments, you're a liar. So much for being gentle there. Okay? But let's understand that they all had their own personalities. But yet they were becoming like him in character, in nature. And what is going on in Jeremiah's day is the whole nation of Judah, basically as a whole, had lost what remnant they had really of his nature. They were starting to embrace his nature at Sinai, and then yet they allowed themselves to be drifted or backslide or slide back into their old default nature. And so now at this point, Judah is in the normal default flesh nature. Only problem is, it makes it worse, is that rather than just being in the flesh, they're claiming that Abba is approving of it, that it's Yahweh endorsed. And Yahweh's saying to Jeremiah, tell them I didn't approve of this. All of that mess is not me. Those prophets are not saying what I'm trying. You're the only one, Jeremiah. You're saying what I want said. Go out there and say it. And of course, that was real popular. And they just, had a parade for Jeremiah and put a nice key to the city around his neck. And they wanted to put a lot of other things around his neck. It wasn't popular at all because you know why? It threatened the leadership who had already established themselves with all the whitewash. Isn't that what happened in Yeshua's day also? Yeshua, walking the earth and teaching what he taught, was perceived by the leadership as a threat instead of an incentive to teshuvah. Instead of an incentive to repent, they saw it as a threat. And so they needed to get rid of him because he was the threat. So they felt the same way about Jeremiah. But they had enough fear put in them that they never killed Jeremiah. They allowed him to live. And so as we go through this in John chapter 5, realize this is talking about, in Jeremiah chapter 5 and in John 15, that this is what they're connecting. These dots are all connecting together. When you see words like branches being taken away, this is where if you've been studying the word, you can rely on the Ruach to bring to remembrance a connecting point. Branches being taken away, John 15. Ooh, okay, that's a big deal. All right? That's a big deal. And now he says here in we're back in John 15 just for a few more seconds. He says, if you guard my commands and you shall stay in my love, verse 10, and even as I guarded my Father's commands and stay in his rest, you need to do it even as he did it. In other words, in the way he did it, he says, these words I have spoken to you so that my joy might be in you and that your joy might be complete. So he said all of these things so that your joy can be complete. So therefore, for those people that read Matthew 5 and say that he did this so that the Torah or the law would be complete, so that means he does away with it, well then also your joy has been done away with. So just realize no more joy in the churches and the people on Sunday. Tell them all they've got no business having any joy because it's complete. Look, in Matthew 5:17 it says, do not think I came to destroy the Torah of the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to complete. And they're going to interpret that as, that means it's done away with. That means it's finished, it's completed, it's no longer valid. Well, guess what? Joy has got the same word there. So he says, if you're doing all of this stuff, which they claim they are doing, then you have no business being joyful because it's done. There's no more joy. He took it away. Isn't that ridiculous? But you see, they won't use equal weights and measures to see how a word is used in other places. This is why we do the word studies that you see me do on a regular basis. Let's go look up every verse where this word is so we can see how it's used so we get the correct understanding of how we apply it. So you can't go to Matthew 5:17 and say it's used this way and then go here in John 15 and say it's used that way. And so John 15:11, he says, that my joy might be in you so that your joy might be complete. So now you have his joy in you, but you don't get to have any joy. Joy is done. It's gone, done away with. He said, this is my command that you love one another as I've loved you. So now that's the other thing is that are we loving one another as he loves us? I have a good friend named David who when I first met him, we were talking about some peripheral things like all these issues that people have about calendars and this and that and the other thing. He says, look, I don't get into that stuff, he said. I'm having enough trouble learning how to love my neighbor as myself, how to love you as I love myself. Then the next time I saw him a year later, he said, I was wrong. He says, I need to learn how to love you as he loves me. That's a whole deeper level. It's one thing to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, some of us hate ourselves. What good is that? There's a lot of self-loathing going on out there. So no, much better is John 15 to say, love your neighbor as he loves your neighbor. Love your brother as he loves your brother. That's a whole different level of love. He says, I want you to love one another as I have loved you. No one has a greater love than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. And you are my friends if you do whatever. You are my friends if you do what? If you do whatever I command you. Okay, so we have all that going on. So hopefully that's just tying things together from Yirmiyahu. We finished chapter 5. I was hoping also to do chapter 7 and chapter 9. So much for that. We got only one chapter done. but understand that this is what we're talking about. They were not, in Judah, remember, having access to Yahweh is like having access to Yeshua. They were not being discipled. The word was not staying in them. The heart wasn't right. This is why he says their heart is not there for all of this. Their heart's in the wrong place. So there's a matching up of what Yeshua was trying to tell the people in his day that was no different really than was going on in Yirmiyahu's day. They still have no heart. They're still foolish. He still calls them foolish and hypocrites. Nothing changed. That's the whole problem is year after year, eon after eon. So nothing is changing. And the reason nothing is changing is because the heart is the problem. You know, I've prayed about this, and we're going to teach a lot more about this even after we finish the little heart of matter thing, is I'm trying to ask the Father, I'm trying to understand, why is it that we still don't change? Because I've been doing this for over 15 years, standing at a microphone for over 15 years, and looking at the people, and nothing's different than 15 years ago. It really isn't. And I want to understand why so that we can fix it. And it's got to do with this. It's the heart. We're not fully submitting and getting it into our heart to have his heart. That's the problem. We're still backsliding or sliding back into the self-sovereign place. And I know I'm beating that to death, but that's the problem. You really want to know the problem? Look in the mirror and realize that's the problem. Okay? Not you, that you're just the problem, but the you being in charge is the problem. The you having your preferences, the you not willing to submit is the problem. I don't want you to look in the mirror and just say, I'm a problem and nobody, I don't want you to know. I'm not looking for you to get depressed. Some of you are going to go back home and be like, no, don't do that. But realize the source of the problem is looking you right in the eyes. It's whatever makes you that id, that I, that ego, whatever, that part of you that wants what it wants, that self-sovereign, that's the part that's the problem. That part needs to be brought into submission. And by the way, you have to bring it into submission. You cannot submit something unless it's yours. I cannot submit a paper, like let's say I write a paper, okay, and I want to submit it to you as my teacher. I can't submit it to you unless it's mine. I have to have it, and it's mine under control, and it's there, and I can hand it to you. How are you supposed to submit yourself to the creator of the universe if you're out of control? You've got to bring yourself under subjection, under submission, before you can now offer it to somebody else. But we don't want to do that. That's a lot of work. We want him to do it for us. We want him to bring us under subjection or just wave his magic wand, and then make it all happen. Well, he hasn't chosen to do it that way. So let's accept that fact, stop whining about it, and realize we have to bring ourselves under subjection. You have to go ahead and get you under control, and then voluntarily, that's the beautiful part, voluntarily submit that to him for discipleship. Making sense? Let's pray. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, King Father, we come before you. We just wanted to have our hearts right. We want to understand the mistakes that Judah was making in the days of Jeremiah as well as in the days of Yeshua. That we would understand that we need to not be a people that are sliding back or backsliding and having a rebellious heart, but that we would have a heart in us, or such a heart in us that we would want to obey and listen and submit, to truly allow you to grab us and mold us and not be resistant at all, but to yield to that molding, Father. That you would mold us into the image of your Son, that you would do what you would want. Have your way in our lives, Father. Father, the heart is the matter. It is the problem, and we understand that. We understand that we have this problem where we don't say in our heart to let us fear you, but we fear other things, and we have fear issues, and we have whitewashing and ear tickling that we're drawn to, and just, Father, help us to get away from all of that mess and just seek you in earnest. To seek you in truth and in purity and in integrity and in honesty, with an open and honest heart and approach of how we really are looking at you and at things. Father, we come before you just really desiring nothing more than that we would be wonderfully looked down upon with a smile on your face because we have submitted and yielded our will and our desires to you. So, Father, we come to you now hoping to have that humbleness of heart, hoping to have that under control of our own emotions and our own desires, to be able to sit at your feet and say, Abba, do your will. Let your will be done, not only on earth as it is in heaven, but in me as it is in heaven. And so, Father, we come to you asking and pleading, and doing so in the name and authority and the character of Yeshua. And together we're going to stand in agreement and say, Amen ve'amen.